Hello! Our story begins inside a mansion on the beautiful, peaceful world of Chandrila. Mon Mothma, the now 20-year-old senator of her people, was celebrating her birthday. She wasn't really celebrating in the way that other 20-year-olds did. She was using this occasion to speak to those with vast wealth, influence, and power within her home world and the Republic. Her husband was lost somewhere in drinks or chatting it up with other people, and she was in the middle of strenuous conversations. Some people, specifically her family, were here to actually enjoy their friend and help her celebrate her birthday. Most were not. That was the game of politics though, especially if you were a simple senator elected during the days of the Blockade Over Naboo. Mon was 16 when she joined the Senate, when she gazed upon the rotunda with belief in what the Republic could be. Now, every waking moment was dedicated to that. She, as per her people's customs, was married before ever setting foot into the Senate building as a senator, as is the life of those with influence. She bobbed her head to things she agreed with. She also shook it to disagree with other statements. There was a race starting on Coruscant. She was suggested to take a stand and try and beat Chancellor Palpatine, but she was hesitant. An incumbent would be challenging, especially one as widely popular as Palpatine. He may have not been the most pro-Republic chancellor in years, but he also knew how to win people's hearts and corrupt their minds. Mon's crowds continued speaking into her mind. Many had their own thoughts on her position inside the Senate. Representatives of local PACs sought out her leadership for single-issue problems, or mandates that'd be best relegated to local government officials. That was part of the prize that came with serving Chandrila. They didn't usually rely on Republic bills to fund their own internal support at home. Chandrila was a strong and influential world, so most of this lobbying was just a continuation of something that started when she was 16. She knew it, just as well as many of her constituents, that she had been elected so that the older business class could get away with her. Throw money at a teenager and she'll buckle. Mon certainly didn't. She understood that public service was selfless, and even though she had plenty of wealth from her family, there were some temptations. But the PACs were typically self-motivated. Their efforts disproportionately favored the wealthy in most cases. After a few hours of mingling with people vying for her interest on bills and votes, she asked one of the waiters to bring her Perrin. Their relationship was as good as any marriage that started at the age of 14. They followed along with tradition as their parents requested. They stayed apart from each other most of the time, but they did support one another. It was probably the most defining aspect of their relationship. They were friends, or friendly, hard to tell sometimes. He'd help her with her anxiety in public spaces like this, and she would help him with whatever he needed. It was a plain, lifeless relationship. It was, more than anything, a business contract, one that served their people more than it served each other. Here, though, would be the display of the actual relationship. Perrin was a little more outgoing and sociable, always had the right words to say when Mothma was weighed down by the reality of bureaucracy and the reality of the Senate itself. The last woman elected into the role of Chancellor was Kiramaz Kaj from Shili, which came about 12 years beforehand, and it would be fair to say around 14 to 16 years ago, because that was when the Senate turned their back on her. Chancellors from outlying systems were always unfavorable in the eyes of the core, and Mon recognized that, but people were more inclined to remember her frustrating administration than the likes of, say, someone like Chancellor Lina So, one of the greatest leaders in all of Republic history, the one that heralded in the golden age of the High Republic. People wouldn't remember her, and Mon would be casted out the second she won, if she could even defeat Palpatine. That was her reality. Those were the thoughts that really started her spiraling anxiety. Something that started with the role of chancellorship and finished with considering what might happen if someone tried to force her from her Senate seat, if she were to say, lose the election. Losing senators after an election rarely stayed in power. Bail Antilles threw his name in the hat for the chancellor after Valorum's vote of no confidence. He was replaced by the astute Bail Organa not more than 6 months later. Perrin helped her forget about these thoughts as he charmed his way through the conversations, telling soliloquies about starliners or historical aspects about their planet's history. Another heroic show of a husband that wasn't much more than an estranged friend. Everything went fine for Mon for the rest of the night. She and parents stuck together throughout the rest of the celebration. The cake cutting and some other finer traditions relegated to Chandrilla's elite. When it was over, it was time to take a breath, before stiffening her back and hitting the holopads for more work. Because she had been a senator throughout the same time as Palpatine's reign, she was already well known by the Senate. People had their problems with her because she frequently opposed the Supreme Chancellor. And in her youth or her age, which comparatively Palpatine was 52 and she was 16 and 32 BBY, she had made some mistakes. One might expect that the Senate would be forgiving because she was a 16-year-old senator, but they weren't. Bureaucracy was an unforgiving world, and just because she was a teenager, it did not mean that she didn't represent one of the most influential planets in the galaxy. The times were hard on her, but she recovered politically, she found her footing, and she gathered allies, even those she frequently disagreed with. Bail Organa and she were both on the same side, but he too often forgot what the Republic was. He believed in the goodness of others, and in a government that paraded around representatives of super conglomerates, rather than humanitarian efforts that actually did good. The system was crumbling, and the further she worked into the night, the easier it became for her to recognize how impossible it was to focus with the prize sitting just before her. Everyone wanted to be Chancellor. She wouldn't pretend to be humble in her own company. Every senator, pretty much ever, wanted a shot at the title. Imagine being Supreme Chancellor. Thousands of star systems to oversee, a galaxy looking to you for leadership, humility, and a word of 1,000 cuts. Any singular action could define your legacy for forever. Like Mon, those who looked to Chancellor Lina So 200 years before believed in the Republic. They believed in what the system could be for others, because that's what a government does. It provides. Or it, of course, could be for the aristocrats to fill their pockets and serve the oligarchs. And Mon lunched something meaningless from her desk, watching it bounce across the floor. She giggled to herself. How did that not break? It bounced a few more times before landing perfectly upright, and it was a sign it was time for bed. Her return the following day didn't feel any different than the work from her birthday. She still hit the grind, and didn't really stop. Her mind was so preoccupied by some bills that she was co-signing. Her placement inside the Senate was important, even for her age at 20. She sat on a number of committees that she found necessary for Republic stabilization. But something about her ranging thoughts from the previous night had her thoughtfully gazing off during important briefings. She still captured all the important information in her notes, but she didn't audibly remember hearing the words. She was working her mind in two different places, and that was a bit much to handle. By the middle of the day, her friend Bail Organa noticed that something was off, and asked her if something was bothering her. She didn't have much to say, and he understood. This wasn't her concealing the reality, she just didn't really know. It was hard for Mon to get distracted from the life of a senator. She found so much enjoyment in it, but she also found enjoyment in other activities, like for example, she and Lud Morai accompanied each other to lunch or brunch depending on schedule, and spoke about sports. That was their thing, but never did it distract her from her work. There was a time for sports discussions and a time for work. That's how Mon operated. Luckily, she had the rest of the day to take a look at the early polling. The race for Chancellor was heating up. Orn Free Ta of Ryloth, Kin Rab of Taris, and Christo of Mon Calamari, and of course Chancellor Palpatine, were the participants for this year's race. She looked through their policy positions, their poll numbers, and, to no surprise, Palpatine was far in the lead. He promised the continued stability of the last 4 years, especially since the Trade Federation no longer looked like a threat. Everyone brought continuations of policies to the table. Orn Free Ta was actually leading the group of non-incumbents. Not a huge lead, all things considered, but he was running on more populist ideals. He wasn't really an Outer Rim representative. He was one of the core-bred individuals. Look at him. He was the size of a luxury liner, and his biggest attribute known to the galaxy was his adoration of desserts. Senators Kin Rab and Christo were two different cases. Kin wanted to establish more trade routes, which was very popular, but her camp was closely aligned with Mothma's. Christo was more or less trying to establish dominance over Mon Cala. The generational rivalry between the Corran and the Mon Cala was intensifying. If Christo won, he could provide Republic legitimacy to the Corran, which would undercut the Mon Cal leadership. He was in last place for obvious reasons. No one really cared about Mon Calamari's internal disputes. Though Mon saw one avenue that could win her more popularity than the Senate race combined. She thought back to her roots. She was frequently inspired by Lina So, a powerful chancellor who won the minds and hearts of the population, and for her short stint in power, she championed the High Republic. She was the face of that era, and sure, Starlight Beacon fell under her leadership, but it was not the legacy she left behind. Most people didn't even remember Starlight, because it existed for less than 5 years. It was a cataclysmic failure at the time, but unlike the blockade over Naboo, the people recognized that she wasn't to be blamed. Had Finis Valorum lived in the High Republic era, he would have succeeded his term. The Senate wouldn't have impeached him, because they would have known that the attack on Starlight came from the outside. The villain was not the leader of the Republic, but the individuals who acted against it. The Trade Federation shouldn't be allowed to operate. Its power was too grand, and it had its hands in too many people's pockets. But that is where Mon Mothma's inspiration came from. If she could say, promote this neoclassical image of the High Republic, and promise that prosperity, then what did the galaxy have to lose? There were slight hints at speciesism from Palpatine, subtle suggestions that wouldn't come to life until he became Emperor. Mon caught them, and she made notes of them, drawing from historical references in the Old Republic of individuals too interested in power. Mon was always an interested young lady. She fancied a life in sports journalism originally, but she came from an affluent family, so she had to put her energy for sports in history, and that wasn't quite good enough. Her family had power, she came from that, and she needed to have her own power, not to be a librarian. Mon's years of studying history to avoid a life of politics would be her greatest aid here, because it meant that she could draw on things done in the past and use them to promote that neoclassicism in her own campaign. Mon Mothma was now challenging the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. Her name was thrown in just before the initial opening closed off. 4 senators versus the incumbent. Palpatine did not underestimate his opponents, especially not inside the Senate. He didn't need to throw his career and future empire away by a single political misstep. A duel or a fight, sure, but not the politics of the galaxy. What surprised him was Mon Mothma. The selfless senator from Chandrila was a jolt to many. No one expected her to jump onto the campaign, and her running points were quite different to say the least. Where the aforementioned senators ran on known policies and positions that people could look up and have immediate answers, Mothma held something unique. Her position on a neoclassical revolution sparked intrigue. Her previous position stances, many of which stood opposite of Palpatine, left people frustrated with her. She frequently looked like an arguer for the sake of arguing, when rarely that was the case. She just foresaw history repeating itself. Mothma believed in the concept of the Republic, but so frequently throughout her youth, from the ages of 16 to now 20, did she not account for the repugnant sweeping changes made since her heroes had passed on years before. The reformist stances of former Chancellor Valorum eventually ate him alive, and thus Mothma had to consider something more efficient, a move that could cauterize the wounds left by Palpatine's first term, while also present a sweeping reform towards this neoclassical lifestyle she mentioned. Now, for this universe, the neoclassicism movement started years prior to the High Republic, but flourished under Lina So. Starlight Beacon was a continuation of the neoclassical Renaissance ideals, a bridge between two differing ideologies focused on bringing the galaxy together. The Beacon celebrated the freedom and ambition of Republic Renaissance politics and art, while its lack of military defense and lack of protection harbored a more relaxed neoclassic restraint. It was convoluted, but what Mon Mothma hoped to achieve was a new galactic outlook on society, reflecting the prosperity seen during those times. One of the biggest interests for Mothma was the structure of the Republic government in the neoclassical era. There was a major conglomerate that basically set the stage for the modern rules and regulations currently being bent by the modern era corporations. About 700 years ago, before the Golden Age, a major company commissioned by the Republic set out to expand into the eastern reaches of the Outer Rim. It was referred to as the East Idini Company. It set up ports along the region and basically acted on behalf of the government. So it could buy and hire troops, utilize a military, take over local planetary governments with contracts, and also starve a population into desolation out of need for any product. The East Aldini Company led to a sort of modern-day resentment towards the Republic, and directly created the rise of the Nile, which transformed into the Zagirians, Hutts, Pikes, and Black Suns. The Republic in the neoclassical era put restrictions on the East Aldini Company. This, for example, saw them become more humanitarian and split a majority of its control up by directly placing it into Republic government hands. Eventually, this did see the company dissolved, and there was a major loss of profit as a result. It for a while was profitable, not good, not morally good at least, but it made money. When it was ripped apart by the government, they made reforms on the laws passed on the company, which was perhaps their biggest mistake. They allowed for the creation of monopolies, with direct oversight from the Republic. Eventually, some 100 years later, it turned into corporations being able to petition for Republic representation. Mon Mothma sought to finish that generation's work by cutting the influence of the corporations, emboldening the power of the Republic, establishing further order, and funding a new Republic renaissance. Mon recognized the importance of art in this equation. The population of the Republic had been forged through eons of artists, individuals, unsung heroes hidden behind grand wars, people that created new cultural movements, only possible because society allowed the arts to prosper. Now in the modern Republic, sure there were towering buildings, but the people had nothing to aspire to with glass structures. Their glory and beauty were manufactured by the reflection of the skies. At night, the greatest and only benefit of these were how they lit the sky like stars. But so infrequently did they create inspiration. She reflected on other worlds around the Republic, where neoclassical architecture still remained, and also how those populations responded to these long-standing creations. Take for example the capital city of Molinist at Harnadian, or even another major metropolis at Pilan, where the architecture flourished beautifully. As per annual statistics, the Mon population had a higher rate of happiness per capita compared to any other major functioning system considered elite by Republic and core standards. Take Corellia, for instance, or Kuat, where industry was prioritized. Only a minority of the population took the income from that production, while the rest lived in the slums, working, no, not working, agonizing every waking moment to provide luxury for a few select elite. Mon Mothma had no room to speak. She hadn't struggled with finances a day in her life, but she was a public servant. This was her job. Quickly and quietly, as the eye of the galaxy started to shift onto her, she created a strategy to reintroduce these neoclassical ideals into the galaxy, while also pointing out Palpatine's subtle uses of speciesism and focus on industrialization or neglect of monopolization. It was very strenuous, but she put together a team very quickly to aid her with this. Bail Organa was among the first to ask if she was really going to try this approach. The population might not see eye to eye with something so old. She understood his points, and even though they bickered more than any of her other friends, she took advantage of it. Bail's disagreements with her helped her reform some of her ideas to be more digestible. But she had already identified herself as public enemy number one in this race. No one else garnered as much attention as she, and when the first non-incumbent debate came, she had to be unstoppable. The other three senators chose her as their victim, which definitely hurt a little coming from Keen Rob. Orn Frita and Christo prioritized the expansion of industrialization, because it would align them closer to Palpatine without just being him. No one believed that they could win this election, and it showed during these debates, so their only real motive was to take down Mothma and make her look like a joke in front of the galaxy. It made the other three look weak. Here, for the first time in generations, was a politician separating herself from her peers to challenge the status quo. Her promises, her counters, every word she spoke was delicately crafted with love for one thing, the people of this galaxy. It was heard, and interest in Mothma's campaign slowly rose. But the problem still remained. She was promoting ideals that resonated with a population that did not live. The current modern population was willing to see the vision, but vote on it? That was a much different story. Profit ran the Republic. Major corporations kept the system afloat, not artists, not architects. Without an interest in the arts from the population in centuries, literature died, music became repetitive. Art transformed into soulless mischaracterizations of original inspirations. How can a politician, one born in a manor on Chandrila, promise a galactic population happiness? You know how naive that sounds? It's almost so arrogant, it's insulting. So Mothma refused to go that route. She mentioned statistics about happiness per capita, but she did not rely on the arts. While they were a major focus of her neoclassical revolution, they were not the campaign promises that could win her an election. Instead, her focus shifted to economic policies that prioritize populations rather than monopolies. The tax cuts from the past 4 years, including the rescinding of Valorum's trade route tax, were gutting the middle and lower class. She printed that at the first debate, and crushed her competition at the second one with it. With allies in her corner, like Anaconda Far from Rhodia, Lud Marai from Cerberon, and Bail Organa from Alderaan, she stacked her side with individuals that had already made themselves semi-unpopular. Bail and Lud were more middlemen in the Senate, but the committees that Mon and Anaconda sat on were the problem. Many of them were seen as anti-republic by the average citizen. So in an effort to reduce that image, they created new formulaic approaches to everyday people, like the Committee for Construction, Transportation, and Interstellar Communication Committee, weren't viewed as big-name branches, but they held the fabric of the Republic together. The Transportation Unit saw materials sent to the Outer Rim worlds in need of infrastructure reforms, which was a positive, but since the payout wasn't immediate, people didn't like it. They also just refused to see anyone else reach prosperity. A classic standpoint of the neoclassical Republic era was community. If someone was down, they were helped out, hence the later creation of Starlight. It was a community space station for everyone. The galaxy was everyone's community. Not now. Regardless, due to her success on the debate stage, she surpassed the competition with relative ease. Orn, Keen, and Christo tried too hard to side with Palpatine, that they presented nothing new or unique, and thus the population and Senate ousted them from the race. Mon Mothma was now heading up the challenge to the incumbent. The last 100 years or so saw the role of Chancellor more easy to hold. Originally, the incumbent had to join the primary debates with all the senators, regardless of having one office. A chancellor about 50 years ago didn't like debating in the primaries, so they stopped doing that, and they won 2 more elections because of it. Technically not illegal, but the courts never settled on a stance, so it was mostly forgotten about. Palpatine had plenty of time to conjure up evidence to support his points, and observe his rival. While he hated the idea of having to hold a legitimate election, he did enjoy the prosperity of embarrassing Mon Mothma on the galactic stage. She was making this more difficult than Orn Free Ta would've, and so he was going to ruin her political career one way or another. Despite having another debate around the corner, Mothma confided with her closest allies to create counters for what Chancellor Palpatine would bring to the table. She knew that she could beat the other 3 without revealing her entire plan. Mon had more ammunition for Palpatine, because his administration directly impacted the Republic, negatively too. Mothma's political movement wasn't just a copy-paste of the neoclassical Republic era legislation. It was heavily inspired, but this movement was designed to be a neoclassical revolution. The hyper-focus on the arts wouldn't be the end-all be-all, but this came with infrastructure reforms, changing tax codes, and military expansion? Wait, what? Yeah, the peace-loving Mon Mothma understood that to best create additional jobs and boost the economy was by doing something semi-unethical. While there had been no clone war by this point yet, and galactic-scale conflict rarely hit the core, this was a move she believed to be necessary. Having spent time around frustrated individuals referred to as secessionists, the future separatist movement that Dooku would inspire, Mothma learned that the key to retaining votes was on both sides. Again, because the Clone War hadn't happened yet, Mon had no reason to fear proposing a galactic military. She wasn't suggesting an all-out mobilization, rather the creation of a system that could benefit the everyday citizen. The Galactic Republic had a massive budget. Creating a unified military could reduce need to provide tax breaks to corporations like the Federation that promised to protect the galaxy in exchange for loopholes in the tax system. Also some Palpatine-era decisions. The first debate between Palpatine and Mothma would be grueling. and frustrating for both parties. They outmaneuvered each other in ways neither anticipated. Palpatine brought up some of her failures in her first 4 years of office. Yeah, the years when she was 16 to 19 years old. She, however, held him on policies that he hadn't prepared counters for. Palpatine was intelligent enough to cover ground, but the damage was done regardless of what he did to cover his back. The debate was a huge surprise for the population and for the Senate. The 20-year-old senator challenged Palpatine, and she came out big. She didn't win the debate theoretically, but she challenged Palpatine, which no one expected. Sweeping reforms reminded people of a young and stoic Valorum. Her sturdiness, even when outmatched, proved to catch people's attention. No one had really stood up to Palpatine in years. She was the first one to do it successfully. This one debate didn't see her beating Palpatine, but it definitely helped her numbers. She knew what needed to be done, so she got back into the lab and started concocting the perfect spell to take down Palpatine's administration. The weeks and months spent on this campaign really isolated her. Mon's friends were always supportive, but they were mostly politicians. Lud Morai was always nice to have in her corner because they could talk about sports for a little while, but it was always back to work following it. Heron was around sometimes, and he played the role she needed him to play, and that worked just fine for her. He would help locate some finer sponsors and aides. She and he would take a few minor trips to Coruscant's elite moon at Hesperidium. Those talks would be very challenging, because most of the elite on that moon had businesses similar to the Federation. Her tax reforms would directly challenge them. However, art was very lucrative for big spenders, and with a Mon Mothma victory, they could potentially see government subsidies to start architecture schools or music programs. There was business in everything. Mon promised reforms that hurt major companies, but also new creations that many of these elite rich people could still profit off of. Mon was setting herself up to be more of a push and pull chancellor. She would challenge the elite, and they did not really like that. Palpatine would financially make so many of them happy. He was pretty much a populist anyways. So for these big money donors, they had to decide if they liked the risk of joining Mothma's rising coalition or remain content with the gradually inclining Palpatine administration. The markets would eat a drop if Mothma won, but the recovery could be even better. These elites saw an opportunity. If they rug pulled the markets on the Commerce Guild, Trade Federation, and Techno Union, they could make out like bandits before the reform started. Many of them saw the profit in that, because they could offer incentives to their millions of employees to buy into the market before the vote went towards Mothma, and then when she won, pull the rug out from under them. The brilliance of the affluent elite was always in their ability to con anyone for an extra buck. Mon was not aware of any of that scheming. The second debate would blindside the two candidates. The election was moving quickly, and they had to be prepared for the showdown. Mothma, as she had before, brought more ammunition, seizing the opportunity to prioritize her vision for the galaxy. She promised more than she fought Palpatine. The few shots she sent his way were massive blows, but she covered the expansion region tax and its fraudulence, promising to redirect those credits back into the people. As a side, the expansion region tax was simply a tax put on the entire region of the galaxy, created because of false reports of pirate raids. The tax credits went into the Senate's pockets, and every so often a Republic-aligned cruiser would patrol the sectors within the expansion region. That was their protection. It was a huge waste of taxpayer credits, and it was a huge knock on Palpatine. He tried to call out the fraudulence of the neoclassical movement again, but it didn't get him anywhere. She wasn't doing the same thing. She read her history, she learned it, and planned to execute a more strategically sound movement than the original neoclassical one. The anxiety that Mothma could display in galas and celebration was completely gone here. She felt alive inside the Senate Rotunda. She felt like her truest self when she was fighting for the people of the galaxy. It could be felt by those who watched in person, and everyone who tuned in again. She called out Palpatine and told him to explain himself for his administration, for their lax rules on the Federation, for letting them persist in ways that the Republic hadn't allowed since the East Identity Company centuries ago. For someone so overly fond of criticizing the neoclassical movement, why couldn't he take something that he promised he believed in and utilized it? After all, it was the neoclassical Republic that fulfilled promises that were focal points of Palpatine's own campaign. She had him on the ropes, but sadly that was not enough. The end of the debate saw her with a small margin behind Palpatine, but almost doesn't count in politics. The election was 3 days away, and she had to cover ground that no other modern politician had done in their careers. The election looked like a wrap. This did not leave Mothma or her camp demotivated. They still had an election to win, and even if they lost by a smaller margin, they would have completely changed the status quo. The Republic would have seen Palpatine's weakness on display for the first time during his administration. The current Chancellor made appropriate counters, and paid the right advertisers to keep Mothma away from his seat. Mon's own donors helped her with that. But she, instead of hyper-focusing on her opponent, went into the city streets of planets near and far. Every day she made multiple stops on large planets with an undecided vote, starting with Coruscant, then going to Hosnia Prime, Stujon, and Corzorite, followed by Megiddo, Scipio, and Molinist. Yes, it may have been 3 days and almost 10 planets, but she pulled basically all-nighters to be there. Day 1 saw Mothma at 3 separate events on Coruscant, followed by a midday showing at Hosnian Prime. Day 2 saw a second event at Hosnian in the evening, with 2 separate showings at Stujon and Corzorite. She slept in hyperspace. Day 3 was a little late, but she started at Scipio, with 1 major event, 2 on Megiddo, and finished up with a 3rd on Molinist. It was a grueling couple of days, but a testament to her character, her determination. Her campaign staff utilized different time zones on every planet to make sure it all aligned, which is why her first and second day were the middle of the day on Hosnian. Regardless, she returned to Coruscant to watch the votes pour in, and she fell asleep. Her camp kept an eye on the results, as Palpatine took an early lead and never really looked back. He was preparing to announce victory, even without a concession speech from his opponent. Then, those votes came in from the undecided planets from before. Her ads played for the last 3 days as they had throughout the entire campaign, and the pendulum shifted. Perrin watched with anxiety, hopeful to watch her accomplish her dreams. She was passed out on the couch with a holotablet in her hands, preparing for a vote the following day. It wasn't even something that related to her election. She had actively been balancing the politics of campaigning and everyday work to be the best public servant as possible. When she woke up in the middle of the night, not really fully rested, she was met by Perrin, who told her to look at the screens. She rubbed her eyes, cleared the blurry vision, and gasped in disbelief. She had woken up to the first of many leading shifts of the evening. The night got longer, and the election was eventually decided. Mon was left in bewilderment. Speaking to the people riled them up. She was personable. It was funny. A core-created senator from an aristocratic family was more personable than the Naboo, mid-rim chancellor who came from a murdered family. Mon spoke to the people, and they responded with hope, but a victory, regardless of how slim, did not mean her troubles were over. Palpatine's concession speech came, and she took the stand with her own address. Truthfully, she never really thought she would win, so a victory speech was never written, but she spoke from the heart, as she had throughout this entire process. Palpatine never anticipated to lose, but in the chance that he did, she would pay with her life, turn her into a martyr, let another election be decided on, per the Republic Constitution. The law says, in the case that a Chancellor-elect dies before reaching office, the previous administration would receive executive emergency powers until the crisis was averted. The original idea was created during the Wars of the Old Republic, when Chancellor-elects could die. No one just went back to change it. So the original idea for the law was that the newly elected Chancellor had been murdered, not died of natural causes, hence the emergency powers. It's why Palpatine could understand an election loss. It made his rise so much easier, with a lot less work. Due to Mothma giving off a speech from her heart, it was short and to the point, and a little slurred. She was exhausted, and honestly the people were quite disappointed that they didn't get more from her. She had huge bags under her eyes. She put on a show for the galaxy, gave her heart and soul into the entire thing, and so these people could forgive her for this one instance. As she was helped off the stage by her husband, an explosion rocked the plaza. People were heard screaming. Mon was taken away by Senate commandos as another set of explosives, targeting the landing yards where her private transport awaited, were detonated. It was an attack meant for her and her crew, so theoretically Bail, Anaconda, and Ludd were supposed to be killed here too, but that was not the case. They survived. The explosion only claimed innocent civilians and staff members. Mon's appearance during the speech became a questioning of poisoning. Someone was unhappy she won, and they tried to make her pay for her life. Luckily, only a minor injury was sustained by Organa. Aside from him, only citizens, supporters, and staff were killed, which, by the way, was still very horrible. The attack came from an unknown source, and because she survived, she was given immediate access to her emergency powers, but she refused. It may have been a turbulent exchange of power, but Mothma was a politician, not an autocrat. Despite her advisors suggesting a quiet return to the Chancellor's bunker, she refused. Whoever was behind the attack wanted her to be afraid. If she gave them the benefit of her fear, her term would be swallowed whole before it could ever get started. The intrigue behind the attack had everyone inside the Republic looking to the Senate, but they didn't respond. Mothma did, from inside the Senate Rotunda itself. She got some rest in between the attack and her speech, but it was a very quick response, one targeted to protect Republic interests. She did not blame anyone, and she felt terrible for those who lost family and friends during the attack. Mon, though, realized her resolve was stronger than ever before. Whoever bombed the celebration would be brought to justice, and the Republic would triumph regardless. She also promised that she dedicated her life to the Republic, to the people of the Great System, and she would never turn her back on them out of protection of herself. Especially due to the fact that she was married to someone she was not in love with, there wasn't really anything someone could do to hold something over her. She loved Perrin to a degree, and this was a mutually shared love, but Mon's position was in service to the Republic. She swore an oath to be their leader, and her speech brought comfort to an already on-edge galaxy. There would be an immediate sympathy for the new Chancellor, but sympathy could not change her administration for the better or the worse. She'd visit the memorial services for every lost soul, while maintaining her duty to the government. The first 2 weeks were really a mirror of the last 5 days. Constant movement, no slowing down, political moves, debates, and meetings. She didn't stop herself until she physically crashed after those 2 weeks came to a conclusion. The Jedi Council was working in cooperation with the Senate Commando Unit and Republic investigators. Everyone was involved with this, and while Mothma was grateful, she was focused elsewhere. Even though she didn't request it, she was accompanied by a trio of Jedi at every moment, 2 Jedi Masters and 1 Counselor. They were not present to speak into her ear about policy, rather just protect her. Mothma may have appreciated it, but she knew that it could not last long. The Senate would see this as favoritism towards the Jedi Order, something she didn't want people to misinterpret. Away from what the tabloids dug into, being mostly about her near-death experience, she went hard in the Senate. Every discussion, meeting, committee, it did not matter. She had something for all of them. Mothma demanded an efficient government. She would not stand for a government that refused to work for the people. This put off a lot of the middle-of-the-aisle politicians, who supported her because they liked the idea or the profit behind a neoclassical resurgence. But that took work. It took everyone coming together, and what Mothma started to do, which was perhaps unethical, was publicly call out individuals who refused to do their damn jobs. This wasn't a luncheon, it was a government. People relied on them. The entire galaxy relied on their efforts, and she was fiercely determined to bring people results. Tabloids tried to call her out for this. Some tried to undermine her efforts by calling her the principal. Political cartoonists drew her with a ruler stick with a prison behind her, and the words legislation, legality, and humanitarians put inside of it. The irony is, this wrongly depicted her image, but that's what happens when someone pisses off the most powerful corporations in the galaxy. Mon and the Jedi had come to the conclusion that one of the big 3 played a part in her attack. The list could be any of them, and that was intentional. Sidious wanted the Commerce Guild, Federation, and Techno Union to be the reasonable suspects. Mon knew that she could not outright challenge the 3 largest businesses in the galaxy. They employed over 1 billion people across numerous star systems. If she tried to bankrupt any of them for an attack made on her exclusively, then she would never politically survive the backlash. Sidious was also working closely with Tyrannus to sabotage her efforts. The Separatist movement was pushed onto the frustrated senators inside the Senate. But there remained a problem for the Sith. These representatives were tired of Republic bureaucracy. Mon Mothma was clearly not a part of the generational game of pass the flag. She wanted to get things done. So, important, and powerful senators that would have been necessary for forming the Confederacy weren't viable options. They were too preoccupied with trying to save the Republic, because that was much easier, and also, no one really knew about the Confederacy. Dooku was just another oligarch, promising something that Mon was actively doing inside the Senate right now, though her greatest political savviness would show itself in the coming weeks. Thanks to the Jedi investigation coming back with evidence against the big three corporations, Mon Mothma created legislation that would look unpopular. It would pretty much destroy any attempt for re-election. But that wasn't the point of politics, now was it? Its purpose was to set up the future for success, and Mothma understood that. If she had 4 years, then make the most of every second. While Mothma would never willingly create a bipartisan bill that would actively hurt the people of the working class, she needed to pass off a piece of legislation that could wall up the big three with government oversight. It was a long-in-the-working plan, but she had put incredible funds into it before ever getting government credits to do so. It was something semi-negotiated with the elites on Hesperidium, but also more of a Republic law. Remember the trade route tax of 32 BBY, when the Federation got pissed off with the Republic, so they blockaded Naboo? Well, this bill would be designed for bipartisan favor, and it would essentially give the big three government subsidies. However, they needed to meet certain quotas that, if they didn't hit, they would lose a majority of their control over the companies. Similar to how the Neoclassic Republic handled the East Identity Company, Mon Mothma would tackle these three. Of course, there was a scenario where the big three accidentally or intentionally hit their quotas, and a backup would be created. But if it all went in line with her campaign promises, then this would work really well. Mon's bipartisan bill included a functional Republic military and the creation of the Defense Council. It effectively combined every sector authority fleet and militia into a Republic Navy, Army, and eventually Marines. Where the big three came in was their quotas. Aside from fulfilling basic needs for the military, these corporations had to provide equal in number to their annual revenue to their working classes. This would need to be fulfilled for multiple years, until they paid their fair share to their employees by the bill's requested date. However, there was a clause, a tiny miniature clause that stated, if they failed to comply, their assets would become synonymous with the Republic. This transaction also included a number of larger clauses that caught the attention more, basically stating that the military branches in each of these corporations would join the wider Republic military to assist it before recruits fully filled the halls of the training facilities. In layman's terms, the big three would willingly merge with the Republic to receive more subsidies, government contracts, etc. Mon predicted that these corporations would be too obsessed with their credits that they would miss the quota or fall behind in the first few months and never catch up. Because these organizations were legally bound to the Republic through their military contracts, the government could seize all their weaponry, vessels, and battle droids without facing legal repercussions. Basically, this was a way to monopolize off a monopoly without fully destroying it, and the irony is, if done correctly, every single employee of the Federation, Techno Union, and Commerce Guild would theoretically become a government employee with all the benefits of a government employee. Initially, once proposed and signed, it looked really bad. There's no other way to frame it. Everything looked piss poor for Mothma on the surface. But, in the end, if it went correctly, it would revolutionize the Republic. In the meantime, while the big three considered how easy it would be to basically usurp the power in the Republic, Mothma got back to work on legislation to challenge these corporations. Just because they had government contracts and subsidies didn't mean that they couldn't pay their fair share of taxes. That was the angle Mon played. The corporations would see her actions as an attempt to fairly tax the elite, not a move to completely take over their power. Everything Mon did following the signing of the Big Three subsidy and the Big Three military deal was just throw obstacles in the road. They didn't even need to land, and if they did, it was an added benefit. The reason these big companies agreed to doing this is because there was a limited time to pay off their annual budgets while also making more money than their annual budgets anyways. The backlash to these bills definitely hurt. The risk involved in doing this was bad enough, but she got every major politician to sign this deal because a lot of them were backed by the mega corporations. This was fully a Republic legislative decision, and honestly, one should see, from the public perspective, how horrible their government was. These bills were designed to make the elite richer, and the Senate overwhelmingly voted in favor of it. Something to think about. If the Senate could just vote on this in 24 hours, then why couldn't they vote on legislation that actually helped anybody in the same amount of time? Most humanitarian, infrastructure, or civilian-focused deals took weeks, months, sometimes they never even made it out of the rotunda. But something where the Senate could make profit? No brainer. It made a lot of people wonder, but not enough to change anything. Mothma's brilliance was undermining the wealthy bureaucrats at their own game. This typical motion would have had overwhelming success inside the Senate, because it benefited them specifically. Mon just happened to be the architect. This was assuring her continued popularity amongst her peers, not her constituents. The continued risk of Mothma was ironically anti-neoclassical, because she was throwing money everywhere. All those social elites from Hesperidium got their chances to open up art academies, which were free, but were classified as non-profit, so another loophole for the ultra-rich. Ways to throw money into offshore accounts within the Outer Rim. However, even with the legislation looking like a direct continuation of Palpatine's rule from the outside, those who would have considered themselves secessionists followed Mon full-heartedly. They understood what she was doing, and they trusted her, mostly at least. This for the Sith became more challenging, and because Sidious and Tyrannus weren't involved with the legal documents signed during the previously mentioned bills with the Big Three, they never picked up on the curse at the center of everything. Mon's first year of turbulent leadership had her approval rating dropping every other week. She herself remained unburdened. New tax laws, restrictions, embargoes, tariffs, and whatnot challenged the Big Three. These were, educated decisions. Mothma was more or less throwing up a distraction every other month. Her market remained afloat, with little change, and as she predicted, up until the year marker of the bill, the Big Three never fulfilled their quotas. By this point, the Republic military had a resounding 3.2 million volunteers. New markets were opening, with shipbuilders on Mon Cala, Corellia, and Kuat getting to work. The arts were flourishing, and finally the bombshell. The move that had inspired Mothma as a teen came to fruition just after her 21st birthday. She didn't celebrate her birthday, or anything, not until this was over. But she did it. Her legally binding agreement with the Big Three went under their radar. The clause on quotas was worded legally correct, but it was framed in a confusing manner. Due to the Federation, Guild, and Union signing off on it, they couldn't play dumb a year later. They had a full cycle to come to a conclusion, and they didn't. Now they were going to pay. The integration of their assets into the Republic military before the year ended was a masterful move, because every single commander, admiral, and general had the troop numbers and control codes to restrict any movements of resistance from the companies. Mothma's Senate commandos arrested the heads of these businesses, and immediately put them behind bars for their inability to serve the Republic. Due to the lack of historical knowledge from the public, this move was kind of concerning. 3 of the largest businesses in the galaxy were going underwater, but the market didn't fluctuate. Why? Well, these businesses were all the Republic now. They held control over everything, and redistributed everything evenly. The combined total income and banking done by these corporations was so inflated that the Republic tripled their annual intake from taxes overnight. Mon's administration went from bureaucracy to sandbox, because she could really do whatever she wanted. Well, she for the past year had already been doing that. She first got the vote to pack the courts, something that passed as bipartisan, because people trusted her after the Big Three bills. Secondly, restrictions were imposed on the banking clans, as the Republic went over its budget to create a new market of Republic-era banking, through private and government-controlled assets. They were able to put a cap on interest, something the banking clan had been doing for years, and also, because most of the banking clans' financial power came from alliances created with the Big Three, they went into immediate financial crisis when the Republic took over their assets. So, with a packed court, the judiciary branch ran through every single corrupt board member on the 3 power players. In that, new amendments were passed to basically ensure the hyper-monopolization scene, first with the East Adini Company and now the Big Three, could never be done again. The banking clan simply provided another layer of challenges to her administration. On the other side of the equation, the Sith had been trying to undermine Mon Mothma the entire time, though to no avail. This wasn't because of their inability, more the fact that Mon accidentally got the Senate on her side by the bills she passed for the conglomerates. The Sith had no one to join the Confederacy, and there were still stipulations between the Sith and the would-be CIS Council. Deals had to be made, and the Republic was offering more than war ever could. So why would the Big Three, especially, want to start a war when they just got contracts with the government? There were other moves made to try and assassinate the Chancellor, but they frequently failed. With everything completely unwinding at year's end, and Tyrannus watching his ideal republic be born through a 21-year-old's idealistic view on the neoclassical republic era, he decided that there was nothing more for him to gain from this alliance. In a duel, Dooku and Sidious would fight to the death. Knowing that his master outmatched him with the Force, Tyrannus stuck to a duel, fighting Sidious on his own terms. It was a hard-fought battle, one that lost Dooku his arm, a severe cut across his abdomen, and a scar down his eye, blinding him from that side. Tyrannus cheated to win, but in doing so, he killed his evil master. The legacy of Sidious would be failing to defeat a 21-year-old Chandrilan aristocrat. However, just because Dooku killed his master, it didn't mean Mon Mothma wasn't still at threat. Tyrannus took over the Sith for himself. He killed Palpatine because his master didn't have the vision to restore the Republic. Dooku wanted a stronger, more unified Republic. Mon Mothma was building that regime. If she stopped doing so, then he would have her killed. His influence still existed. Palpatine had nothing left politically to offer, so it was a worthwhile decision in Dooku's mind. Mothma's term continued though. The sweeping reforms she promised eventually came to fruition. It was grueling and difficult, as pretty much everything had been through the first few months of the administration. But with the major conglomerates out of the way, she could focus on the actual legislation she got into office on. While these moves to backstab the conglomerates wouldn't be super popular, the new election cycle for the Senate would see the old-era Palpatine loyalists voted out of power. Mon's callouts rallied voters against lazy senators, and their reluctance to act because they couldn't profit off of what was now Republic property, so they tried to sabotage her administration. Thus, with them being voted out of power, the neoclassical rebirth or revolution could start. The focus on the arts was still a tough sell, but happiness growth per capita came with the destruction of the Big Three, with Republic oversight. This era would be highlighted by a rise in new art forms, music, and other specific medias rising again, like the Habrin Rhee opera and Ganther dances and waltzes. Thanks to the extra funds accumulated by taking over the Big Three, the Republic returned to the Starlight Beacon project, using leftover credits to rebuild these stations, but modified and more prepared for attacks. The Starlight 2 program saw 3 structures created and released into the public within 2.5 years, just in time, coincidentally, and it was a coincidence, for Mon's re-election. She almost refused to run, but popular demand saw the Republic requesting another 4 years. Just like her first term, there would be some struggles and tension, but she had more freedom and support to build a Republic regime focused on the population. Despite giving out initial support to those who helped her win the first election, Mon was not forever indebted to the elite. This was her final term. She was grateful, but there could be no individuals to take advantage over anyone else. It was a free system, but not one that rewarded corruption. Actions have consequences, and with a nearly united government, Mothma could pass everything she wanted for the next 4 years, mostly. Her life following chancellorship would be peaceful. She remained a constant around Coruscant as a sponsor for several other senators, and eventually future chancellors. If Mon liked you, chances are you'd have a shot at being chancellor someday. Her support moved mountains for individuals that didn't come from great wealth. There were even votes passed by her administration that stopped individuals from serving the Senate for life. The Republic, like any government, still had corruption to weed out, but the new neoclassical era had begun. The arts were thriving, the people were becoming happier. War was far from the horizon, not even a blip. A Republic military offered true protection, and the Starlight 2 program added a new sense of community to the galaxy. Mon's burden would forever remain a wish that she could have done more. But as her life carried on, she became more defined by her actions out of office than what she did as a chancellor. Her legacy was that of the legends she grew up idolizing. Like Lina So, Mon Mothma represented the best of an era, and while the new neoclassical era would have many years of development, Mon's 70 more years of public service and life would see some of the greatest modern achievements of the Republic, some being territory expansion and others being modern artistic classics. All of it started with the idealism of someone who had a 1 in a million shot, of someone who could be anyone. That was her legacy. She left that for the galaxy she loved, and a galaxy that loved her so much more. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the C-SPAN story. So, similar to the Padme defeating Palpatine at Reelection, this one had to go in a much different route. I think the Padme one had a lot more focus on committees and bills, and a lot of this because Padme wasn't an established politician. She just became a senator and then went straight for chancellor, whereas Mon Mothma has a good 4 years to kind of settle. Ironically, in both stories, Padme and Mon are like really close in age. They're like 18 and 20, I think, when they beat Palpatine. In this specific story, I wanted Mon's focus to be less on committees and groups, and more focus on like the movement itself. I thought the idea of like kind of backhanding the major corporations would kind of work. There is some inspiration in this from the Reign of the Empire book. Mon Mothma interacts with some elites from the moon of Hesperidium, so there is some influence from the Reign of the Empire book here. But more than anything, I wanted to depict Mon as like the idealistic individual that we see in Star Wars anyways. She is that's just who she is. But I also kind of wanted her to be focused on like this classic era, something that I feel like she would draw on as inspiration, and I chose neoclassical. There's not like a literal neoclassical movement in Star Wars, it's just a word that I think would encapsulate something that would inspire Mothma, and I think that's kind of how she would actually do it. I think she would handle her own well in debates, and I think using some things against Palpatine to kind of twist him and kind of portray him as like the architect of why the Federation blockaded Naboo, kind of being like a way for him to get ousted from power. I think going for like a more grassroots approach to a campaign, especially in Star Wars, I think that could work for her really well. And then for like going against the Federation, the big three as I call them in this story, I really like the idea of her giving them what they want. The idea of them missing that clause isn't that they just completely miss it, it's that they just kind of forget about it. Like I said, it's a minor, tiny clause that's just like, hey, you guys gotta give your employees like benefits, and they were like, okay, and then they forgot about it. Because of course they're gonna forget about it. They're getting handed subsidies, and then the government's like, oh, actually, just on top of those subsidies, here's a tax on trade routes. And they're like, yo, what the F, bro? And then it's just this constant like bickering, and that intended bickering is meant to just distract them. Mothma's entire administration for the first year is just distracting the big three with like, hey, here's another embargo on your favorite product. And they're like, dude, why are you doing this? You just gave us subsidies. And she's like, cause it's funny. And eventually they just kind of forget about that clause that they were meant to, fulfill a quota for. And that's what fails them the most. As for Dooku and Sidious, I really think Dooku would kind of turn his back on Palpatine. I think Mothma would have the right kind of movement in the Senate to kind of keep all the secessionists away from following Dooku. Dooku is, he's still an oligarch. He's still a guy that was just born into power, and Mothma would offer a change to the status quo that Palpatine couldn't offer in a second term. So I hope you all enjoyed another C-SPAN story. I think this is one of the longest C-SPAN stories, and I think it's deservedly so. I think this might be one of the better ones too, but I'll let you guys decide. I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, remember my friends, may the Force be with you.